Hey everyone, we just wanted to talk to you a bit about the Winter Reserve that you've all just received, and also just a bit of a sum up of the year that we've had in the Four Seasons. Go back to a bit about what it was all about in the first place, and have a little bit of a G&T as well.
So John, talk us through your concept of a winter gin. I appreciate it's probably the hardest one you've done in terms of available sort of produce to use. But what's your thinking?
Yeah, I guess in terms of the flavours in the end, it was actually one of the easier ones to create. But you're right, the produce available when you think about it in terms of a seasonal, what's growing and what's coming into harvest in winter, we were limited in what we could do. So I decided to look at it more in terms of the whole Four Seasons concept, and it was about that use of seasonal produce, but also then looking at the different harvests we get in the spring, summer, autumn. And then I thought, well, okay, if we're limited in what we actually grow and harvest in the winter, then what do we use from our previous year? So what do we use from the autumn harvest? Your summer herbs. I looked at the way people, particularly in rural communities years ago, which is our story originally was about rural ingenuity and about using produce that was grown locally. And it's about trying to make that produce last as long as possible. So people taking the herbs that they've grown through the summer and are harvested in the autumn, drying those and then using them through the winter within their cooking. So things like rosemary and thyme. Rosemary is quite hardy. You will get rosemary throughout the year.
And thyme to a degree as well.
Yeah,
they're both sort of available as fresh herbs.
So there's something you can always go out into the garden, but given it gets a bit cold and wet, it's probably not something people want to do as much. So you will get people bringing it in, cutting it down for the winter just to sort of keep it nice and cropped, and then drying that produce and using it in their cooking. So I looked at rosemary and thyme particularly because I thought about roast dinners and that kind of warming, kind of herbaceous smell that you get from that winter cooking. And then I looked at what are we eating alongside that, and it's those kind of fruit crumbles, those warm fruit crumbles. So I went with the brownlee apple and the forced rhubarb. Obviously forced rhubarb is something we get all year round, but brownlee apples tend to be picked late in the autumn. They're one of the later apple crops, and then they will last into the winter months for people to use in cooking and things. They're quite acidic, so they actually do preserve a little bit better than some of the other apple varieties. So that's where the inspiration came from. It was less about what grew in winter, but more about what were the flavours of winter for us.
I think from a sort of a fruit and a herb aspect, that's very much our garnish with all the other sort of core gins that we produce. We know there's a perfect marriage between whether it's sort of an orange or a grapefruit and rosemary and sort of thyme. They marry well, I guess. So I guess that was the other sort of way to.
And it was surprising actually. I mean, when we did the first tastings of the sort of first couple of iterations, the tartness that came through with the apple and the rhubarb was surprising.
I was really surprised by the rhubarb from a flavour perspective.
And we tried the rhubarb on its own, didn't we? Just in its own steep spirit, and it was really flavoursome. Lots, and the apple and rhubarb was very similar in taste actually. Just you got that sort of tart, very subtle hint of sweetness. But I think that tartness with the herbs, when we do the tasting, and if you've already had some of your Winter Reserve, what you'll find is that kind of tart sweetness is very much the start of it. So you do get that earthy juniper hit to begin with, and then you get that apple and rhubarb tartness. But the lasting finish is quite herbaceous. So you get the piney notes of the rhubarb, of the juniper, but then the rosemary and thyme really come into their own at the back end.
I think for me, what was really surprising from the rhubarb perspective was I had a very different perception of what rhubarb tastes like. I thought it was going to be very different. And when you just did a concentrated essence, it was very interesting to sort of pick it up from on the palate.
Yeah, and we went with specifically forced rhubarb because I think you do get a slightly different flavour from that than you do from the seasonal rhubarb. But yeah, I'm really pleased with the result, and I hope you guys will enjoy it as well. It's been an enjoyable year for me as a distiller. I think my passion has always been about creating flavour and about trying to marry flavours together in a really balanced but complex way. And I think this year with these 4 gins, we've really.
I think for me it's been a journey, and we wanted to sort of take people on a journey. Each gin is very different in terms of its sort of tasting profile. The botanicals are very unique in terms of there's no sharing of botanicals. They're very much sort of botanicals that capture that essence of each season. And I really enjoyed the journey, and it's quite interesting. I was out in the garden at the weekend, and the primroses are just starting to come through again. And I was like, I remember, working with you on the sort of spring gin, going, how do we capture spring in the bottle? And there's been a lot of talk about the fact that seasons are sort of coming through, a month early, and it was just really interesting. We're finishing our 4 seasons society with our winter gin, and already the primroses are coming through. But I've really enjoyed it, and I hope everybody has enjoyed what we're trying to do. I think from your perspective, you love creating stuff, you love challenging yourself, and it's been really interesting to see where you've taken us. Is there a particular gin that out of the 4 that you particularly like?
I like them all. There was a few surprises in there. I think Primrose was one of the surprises for me, a bit like you.
My idea.
That nutty, really rounded flavour that you get from Primrose really surprised me.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of what challenged me the most, it was the Summer Reserve. The plethora of ingredients that we got from Helligan, the different flavours, trying to marry those into something that really stood out as we said at the time, we wanted to create something that had that warm scent of kind of just toasted flowers and herbs and things that you get in the summer months. But yeah, trying to create that from what was quite a complex set of botanicals.
Pretty powerful botanics.
Botanicals. I mean, the Pelargonium again, really surprising, but
and the pepperwood as well.
Yeah, pepperwood, Pelargonium, but the combination of those together, I think, was probably the toughest part of this year's tinkering, I guess. But I liked what you said about the seasonal aspect of it. That if we've come out of this as a distillery with a goal in mind, it's probably to look at the sustainable aspect of what we do. And I think what we did with trying to use very local and seasonal produce, it really honed how difficult that is, particularly within our climate, and the fact that our climate is changing and it's shifting. And very simple things like using produce that's been grown within a few miles of a particular facility, and that's not just about us as a distillery, but just in terms of our production in general in the UK. I think it's something that people should look at in more depth, and we're going to do this year. So it's been a good learning exercise.
I think you should make a winter gin.
Yes. As always, we're going to start with our tonic, because we don't want the gin to be shocked by our cold ice. And then we'll let the garnish. We actually sent out some dried apple rings with the packs this time around, and that's really just to what you find when the apple dries, you don't get as much of that acidity and that tartness, and it was quite a tart flavour coming through from the rhubarb and apple, and I wanted to lighten it with a bit of sweetness, and hopefully the dried apple will give you that in the gin and tonic. And then a nice healthy measure of the gin.
1 or 2? Just the one?
Just the one today. It's early. I don't have anything to stir it with, but we should give it a little shake around just to let that mix in. We've talked about it before, but the key in terms of a really balanced drink is about the different temperatures of those liquids, and as that gin cools more slowly, it will start to mix better with the tonic rather than being shocked and then bringing some of those.
I guess if we had some rosemary, you could add a sprig of rosemary in there as well. Just
you could. I mean, there is quite a lot of rosemary coming through at the end of this, so the reason I didn't go with a herb is because I didn't want to bring that out too much.
Okay.
But I think you could do if it's a flavour that you really like within this gin. So cheers and thanks for joining us this year.
Thank you. It's been lovely to have you all supporting us through this year's seasonal journey, and we're very sort of privileged to have sort of such a strong following, and the fact that you all sort of signed up for a full season subscription was fantastic. So I wish you a very happy 2022, and we're definitely sort of going out and doing more events this year. So we hope to see you at some of the events that we're sort of doing, and would love to sort of hear your feedback in terms of which one was your favourite seasonal release. And so cheers and thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.